Thank you. What an introduction. I thought I would just sit and listen for a while. Gard could do my shtick, and you do it really well, probably better than I do it, so that's pretty great. Well, anyway, can you all hear me okay? That sounds to dead. Full props, by the way, to the most technically competent and gracious AV person I've ever dealt with in 20, 30 years of public speaking. But on the record, give that man a raise. Okay, so my hope with you is to explore what can we do ourselves when the bottom falls out. It feels like the bottom falls out, and it falls out for different reasons. Maybe you discover that someone you thought was your friend has been stabbing you in the back, or maybe your partner has been fooling around. Or maybe you get a diagnosis. Wow. Or you get laid off. The bottom starts to fall out. Maybe you suffer a terrible loss. I have loved ones who, for example, have suffered sudden losses of others they love that just wrenched their whole world. And they're still dealing with that later. Or maybe you come to a university where people are getting shot. Or you live in a city where people are getting shot. Or I live in California, a wildfire burns your house to the ground. The bottom falls out. Or an election occurs in which 50.2% of American voters re-elected Donald Trump. And many are celebrating that, and many are not. And we can accept the results of an election while being simultaneously extremely concerned about the consequences. So there are many ways in which the bottom can fall out. Maybe you live in a country that has suffered a terrorist attack grievously, or you live also near that country and your children and your schools and your land are being bombed by governments or elsewhere in the world. The bottom can fall out. So it doesn't make sense to me to compete for suffering. My suffering is bigger than yours, or it's more unjustified. We're all suffering. We all are wounded by life. The question becomes, what can we do about it? And we can certainly do what we can in terms of intervening in society. Great. Personally, I have been a therapist one way or another for almost 50 years, working with people. Personal practice, that's been my work. Recently, I've been giving more thought, especially the last 2 years, about what do we need to do to change systems and structures in fundamental ways that have so far been impervious to other positive changes. What do we do? So I'll be talking about that, but my main focus tonight is what we can do ourselves. And I'm going to offer 4 basic principles, 4 strengths that we can grow inside when the bottom falls out. And because I'm a methods guy, I'm a practical person. I love science, I love wow, it's so cool. And I'm really interested in applications. How do we use this stuff? So I'm going to offer best practices for what to do when the bottom falls out, from research on that territory, my own clinical experience, wisdom from different perspectives, and just common sense. See for yourself if it makes sense for you. Those 4 basic principles, basic strengths would be helpful for me these days, or helpful for others that I care about, even for whom the bottom has really fallen out. So that's what I'll be exploring, practical stuff. And you can relate to it as almost like checklists, okay, got that, Rick, that's interesting. Whoa, that would really help. I'm going to pay attention to that. And then on from there. You can also relate to this, if you like, as almost like a meditation, an inner practice, as you move from kind of state of being to state of being to state of being. And one of the key points here, that's one of the dirty little secrets in psychotherapy world and coaching world and parenting and human resources training, is that most of the positive experiences, most of the useful, beneficial experiences, not all of which are enjoyable, like realizing when you hit bottom that you really can't drink anymore, or realizing, oh my gosh, I can't raise my voice in that way to my 4-year-old daughter. Just slam. That's not a happy experience, but it's a really important one to sink in, right? Okay, so what do we do when we start to experience something useful, how do we help it land? And that's where some brain science is really useful, because it points out that the dirty little secret is that most of those beneficial experiences, for most people, most of the time, including my clients, wash through the brain like water through a sieve. Well, meanwhile, those moments of irritation, hurt, anxiety, ruminating, resentment, get sucked right into the brain because of that well-intended negativity bias. So whenever we're experiencing something beneficial, like it would be enjoyable or useful or both, it's so useful to, while experiencing that state of being, slow down, to kind of marinate in it for half a breath, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, to keep the neurons firing together so they start wiring together as well. And we don't waste that useful experience or insight or sense of personal strength or worth or commitment. We don't waste it on our brain. We actually help learning land, learning in the broadest sense. That's crucially important. That second step is how we turn states of being, useful feelings, useful bodily conditions, useful ideas, useful intentions, we turn those states into traits, because that's what we carry with us wherever we go. You know, when things fall apart, you start to realize that a lot of stuff you relied upon ain't there anymore. What you can rely on is what you've already developed inside yourself. So I work backwards from what would be useful to develop inside ourselves, and then knowing that, how can we start to experience it and then internalize those experiences, take in the good, so it actually lands inside. And it's really cool. That second step is easy. Just stay with it for a breath or longer. Feel it in your body, track what's enjoyable about it, what's rewarding or meaningful about it. These are well-researched methods for increasing the hardwiring of the benefit into your own body. Nobody needs to know you're doing it. You know, they can be doing their thing and internally you're like, I'm letting this land, I'm letting this land. Heck with you, I'm letting this land. It's under our control. No one can stop us from letting what's useful land inside, but nobody can do it for us. Nobody can intensify the internalizing of useful experiences except us. So we're responsible. We have an opportunity and a responsibility, which means that if we do it, we will earn the results. We will earn the fruits of our practice again and again and again, many times a day. And the more that the world is kicking a person in the teeth, the less the world is supporting somebody, the more important it is to follow this path of gradually growing the good inside that lasts for one's own sake, as well as for the sake of other people. So that's an overarching principle. The fancy term is positive neuroplasticity, essentially, or self-directed neuroplasticity. That's an overarching principle for whatever you find useful here. You can slow down for half a breath or longer and kind of let it land inside. Okay? So, I have notes. I need my notes. Great. Good. Here are the 4. And I'll actually name them briefly, and then I'll go through each one. And then we'll have some discussion. We'll have some good trouble here, as John Lewis put it, bless his memory. So, first principle, first strength, is to take heart. You know, when things are crummy, we need to come back to our own heart, and I'll say more about that. Second, see clearly. The weirder it is, the shakier it is, the more we need to find our own footing. See clearly, including in the face of all kinds of people who are trying to confuse us. Third, do what you can. Take the action you can. Action binds anxiety, as Angelos Arian put it. And then fourth, find peace. So these are the 4 kind of headlines. These are 4 strengths. You can look inside, what would be useful for me these days? So let's go into them. The first one about taking heart is to be kind to yourself. One of the, for me, I'm a slow learner maybe, took me a while to get, was the lesson that maybe half the people I was seeing in my clinical practice, I was doing what I could for them. In effect, I was pumping them with gas, my hot air, but like gas, but nothing would happen because their pilot light was out. They were not on their own side. They were loyal to others, they were kind to others, they were compassionate to others, but not toward themselves. Because, for various reasons, not because they were bad, but because maybe they'd been shamed about standing up for themselves, or maybe they'd been taught that they didn't deserve to take care of themselves, that they needed to take care of other people, or that they were damaged, or it would be sinful somehow to take care of themselves. And that's foundational principle, to be for ourselves. And that's one of the very first things to grow, to ignite the pilot light, if it's not already established there. To realize that you have rights too. There's a place for compassion for yourself. And then last, moxie, a kind of determination that says, this is my life. Here I am. What the heck? And I'm going to make it as good as I possibly can. That kind of fundamental spunk, sometimes fueled somewhat by anger. Okay, use that, where we're on our own side. So that's a key aspect of taking heart, including compassion for ourselves. It's interesting that self-compassion, compassion is simply empathy plus benevolence, right? We feel for suffering, and we're not indifferent to it or exploiting it. We actually are motivated to relieve it if we can. Often we can't. We can't bring that loved one back. We can't change the election. We can't rebuild, our house burned to the ground. We'll never get those baby pictures back and other things. So even if we can't change things, we can still have compassion for ourselves, right? Or for other people. Self-compassion is now very researched and makes people stronger. Compassion for oneself makes people more ambitious because they're more willing to risk. They're more able to stand against that inner critic that's tearing them down, so they, don't dare to swing for the fences. And self-compassion also helps people recover better and faster from trauma. So compassion for oneself, which means we feel what we feel. For a while, we might feel shock. We might feel disgust. I have, moral views about people who vote certain ways or can't be bothered to even get off their butt and register to vote in the first place. I have opinions about this. I have values. I'm probably not alone. Moral outrage, there's a place for that. On the other hand, getting stuck in helpless outrage and disgust is really toxic for the nervous system, for the body, and for relationships over time. We don't want to get stuck there. So we start with whatever we feel, and then ideally with compassion for ourselves. Also, with regard to taking heart, I'm back up to here. There we go. Great. I think about protecting the heart, by which I mean protecting our vulnerabilities and what we're feeling, what we're paying attention to. We're in for 4, if not more years of a lot of spectacle. And I think about the teaching of the Buddha, some of my favorite parts in Buddhism, which I'm not pushing, I'm just kind of naming, see for yourself, where the Buddha said himself in his journey toward awakening that he would have many painful experiences, normal, but they would not invade his mind and remain. He says, they would not invade my mind and remain. They would pass through awareness. He would be angry, he would be sad, he would be hungry, his body would hurt, he would be sad that someone he cared about died, say, but it did not invade him, it did not occupy him. And there are a lot of forces out there that are actually going to try to occupy our minds. I read this piece a while ago from a fellow who grew up in Haiti, 30 maybe years ago, when there were horrible dictators there. Okay, instead of the current terrible chaos. Anyway, he escaped the death squads just ahead of them with his life. Young man, went to Canada, worked as a dishwasher, and then started writing, discovered he had a gift for it in French. Eventually, he got the highest literary honor from France in that language, and the first one for someone not born in that country. So he was interviewed, and the thing that he said that really stuck with me, he said, when you're dealing with a dictator, or a warlord or an autocrat of some kind, they actually don't care if you like them or not. They just want you to think about them all the time. They want you talking about them. They want you to think about them. They want to draw your attention with one shiny outrage after another. right? Including outrages that deliberately make you feel helpless, which as a species, by the way, as mammals in general, we're very vulnerable to acquiring learned helplessness and even hopelessness. So we got to be very careful about that. So what are the influences, we let inside? We have in the brain a key part of it called the default mode network. I call it the ruminator, right? It's where we go when we're ruminating. And there are things we can do to protect it if we're caught up in those loops. These are two kind of super cool brain hacks. Okay. Here's the first one. Come into the present. Because so much of rumination involves mental time travel. What happened in the past, worry about the future, distinct from what's true right here, right now. I'm sitting here, I'm breathing here, the bagel's okay, coffee's wonderful, this is a nice person, still here, I'm not going to swear, I'm going to try to not swear here. Heck with them, I'm right here, right now. Come into the present, because that right there disrupts rumination, coming into the present. Second, this is a really cool hack. Engage what's called interoception, where what we do, a simple way, you can do it right now, is be aware of this, and if it's breathing's okay for you. Some people it's not to pay attention to breathing. But if it's okay to pay attention to breathing, the sense of air flowing in and flowing out, chest rising and falling, or a more general sense of kind of your own internal weather system, interoception. Well, a part of the brain called the insula, two of them on the inside of the temporal lobes, is involved with tuning into ourselves. And when we engage that part of the brain, it acts like a circuit breaker and shuts off activity in the ruminator. You can just notice it. That interoception quiets, the hamster wheel of negative, anxious, worrying, and brings us to a greater sense of peace. I think it's also really important to keep our heart open deliberately, in terms of taking heart, reach out to others, find others we care about, stand in solidarity with others. What's interesting is that we're often limited in the caring coming to us. I think of caring in 5 major ways, kind of from very basic to pretty intense, to feel included, seen, appreciated, liked, or loved. 5 basic ways to do that. Well, it would be wonderful. I would love more 5-star reviews for my book on Amazon or whatever, But guess what? There are limits on what can come to us. On the other hand, interestingly, we can always mobilize a certain amount of friendliness or kindness or good wishes, even for strangers we pass by on the street. And as we mobilize, some caring ourselves, that's authentic. Authentic. It can seem so unfair. I'm being mistreated, they let me down, and you want me to be more caring? But yeah, for your own sake, because love feeds us as it flows through us either way. Seeing the worth in others, seeing the burdens they're carrying, walking past you on the street, the secret struggle that everyone carries. We don't know what it is, but we all have a secret struggle. They have a secret struggle. That can feed the heart. And I think about examples of different kinds from people who are able to do that even with those they oppose, right? We can have boundaries with those who drain us while not letting hate invade our heart. So I think I have 2 examples of that, of beings throughout history and at the present time who are able to be strong and dignified while speaking truth to power, being powerful. One example is Thich Nhat Hanh, for me a profound teacher as well as a major, major activist. And there's an incredible black and white photo of him and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when Thich Nhat Hanh came to America and was then exiled from his native country, Vietnam, because he was protesting the war there. And you can see this picture of both of them, weary, determined, dignified, caring in their face, but no hatred in their faces at all. It's a beautiful, profound picture. And Thich Nhat Hanh was described as this combination cloud, butterfly, and bulldozer. All right? We can be the bulldozer with our heart open even as we deal with others. And then the other example that I'll never forget, I lucked into a situation in a room roughly the size, 100, 150 of us, with the Dalai Lama. He had come to California for a conference, and I lucked into the room. So he walks into the room with his translator and this other fellow, something, and he delivers this great talk. I forgot the talk entirely, but I remembered his other guy. Okay, walks in with the Dalai Lama, just stands there in the front of the room, kind of like this. Dalai Lama's sort of over there, and dressed in a suit, Tibetan. He kind of looked really fit, like, he had sort of the body of a middle linebacker or something. And he just was so kind, he's just smiling at everyone. You could just tell, kind of benevolent, radiating bodhicitta. And his eyes never stopped moving. He was the last line of defense, Dalai Lama, when he came to that event, had tremendous security. There were snipers on the hilltops, there were helicopters. They protected him, right? Because he was a target for assassination and other things. And that fellow standing there, just radiating love, was the Dalai Lama's ninja. He was there to take a bullet for the Dalai Lama if he had to. And you could feel from him that he was there entirely out of service, completely relaxed, and completely capable, completely ready to deal with anything he needed to. And I felt, I get chills right now, sharing that memory with you. That combination right there is an example of how to keep our heart open and still rest in our heart, even as we do what we need to do. Okay. And then the last thing I want to say about taking heart, the first strength, is something that's been a personal reflection for myself. We're all wounded. Sometimes the wounds are because we've been attacked. We've been trafficked. We've been discriminated against. We've been assaulted. Somebody's betrayed us. They've done stuff to us. We also get wounded morally when we have to reckon with our own mistakes, as I've actually been doing a lot of over the last several years. It's been a real period of reckoning with mistakes and regrets and remorse and sometimes shame. Those too are wounds. We carry those with us. And then we have losses. Loved ones, shocking losses. Frankly, I'm still really carrying around the catastrophic loss of our families, especially our daughter's cat, 3.5 years ago. We carry these. What do? Well, if we push away the wound or lie about it, it just festers. It goes underground. The mind and the brain is not like a flush toilet, it's like a septic tank. Stuff sticks around. And so we can't push them away, but what we can do is we can feel the wound alongside love. We can bring the wound into the heart. We can connect it to love, and we can carry the wound into love. You can imagine trying that, where you feel the wound, and then in some way, you bring it into love. And that softens the wound, it makes it more bearable, and brings us out into what we really care about, not contracting around the wound or our grievance or other things, but rather opening out. In our podcast recently, we got to interview Judson Brewer, Dr. Judson Brewer at Brown, psychiatrist who studied initially addictions and then moved into anxiety and other things. And he's a really good guy, he's good material. And he also is a longtime meditator, so we had him on our podcast. And I asked him, okay, Judd, you're a serious practitioner, and you're a deep brain scientist, and you're very practical. Okay, for yourself, what's maybe the biggest thing that you've learned from all this highfalutin brain science stuff that you apply to yourself, that you actually use concretely? He said, the range between openness and contraction. Am I contracting or am I opening? Moment to moment to moment. Because so much of mental health is about opening rather than contracting. So around the wound, understandably, you get punched, you contract around it. The grievance, we contract around it. It's very full of self, me, myself, and I. And that's okay for a bit, but long term, it's not good for us. And so on the other hand, we can look for ways to open out, to see things in a bigger way and a broader perspective. And carrying our wounds into love is one way to do that. Okay, so that's the first one, take heart. Second, see clearly. I have a lot of background in wilderness, rock climbing, and mountains and stuff. And one of the things is to know where you are, what's going on, is the storm coming in, what's the truth, is your partner spaced out, are they actually holding the rope? I've been dropped rock climbing by various people who shall be nameless. I am happy to say, taken hundreds of people rock climbing in personal growth environments, I have a perfect safety record, and I'm going to keep it that way. So see clearly, right? We got to see the real stuff clearly. That's really important. So right now we're being bombarded with BS. I'll even use a technical term about which there's an academic paper on bullshit. Right? We're bombarded by it. The most recent cycle, Elon Musk spent $132 million on social media and other advertising. Whether you like the results or not, it's just simply a fact that we're being bombarded with BS. So being able to wade through the disinformation and misinformation and realize that actually most things within 10-ish minutes on Wikipedia or university websites or credible news outlets that admit and correct their errors, really important, you can find 80 to 90% of what's relevant about a big issue fairly quickly. Is the planet heating up? All right? What was the vote count in the most recent election? What's actually the truth? So we can do things to find out the truth, and we can also be aware of the people that are trying to confuse us. It's important to be aware of facts close at hand. How am I doing? And to, take that into account. And it's really important as well to discern if actual harms are coming our way, right? There are a lot of people that are trying to get us revved up. I was talking with someone earlier, seeing if she's still in the room, who, in her personal situation, which I'll kind of disguise, was betrayed by someone in her life. And she had the kind of enlightened self-interest to, have her private feelings about that, but basically go forward in her life, because that's what was actually best for her. She had friends who were really mad at the person who betrayed her, and were trying to rev her up about that. And she was like, okay, I got it. I really appreciate you're on my side, but it's not good for me to get all revved up about that. So there are people who, they're like really mad that we're not so revved up too. And remember that we can see what's true and we can stand up for it and know what we're going to do without adding the baggage of all that revved upness if it's just not true for us. Okay. And I'm not speaking against getting revved up. Sometimes we need to get revved up because that empowers us to get revved up together, but a little careful about that, especially about stuff that's more spectacle. On the other hand, what about the real harms coming our way? Maya Angelou put it, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time, right? And it's a fact that America, the world's oldest democracy, has already taken several steps down the slippery slope in the historic playbook leading toward authoritarianism. It's a fact. We may not keep sliding. We can see the forces that want to slide us further, in part by dividing us from each other and disrupting the very idea of the common good. We can see that. And we can recognize who generally is lying and who's generally telling the truth. We can also recognize who generally takes responsibility and who generally brushes it off. And we can also recognize who generally is promoting the rule of law, basic fundamental principles, and who's attacking them. We can see that. And I'm not sure what's going to happen over the next 4 years or even beyond, but it's really clear, while not knowing how big they'll be or how often they'll be coming, storms are heading our way. Storms are heading our way. And kind of like in rock climbing, you can't see what's on the other side of the mountain, but we can know that some storms are heading our way. And part of seeing clearly is to recognize that, including the early signs. Many people in America, me included, completely underestimated the intensity of the movement in the last 10 or 20 years toward autocracy. Underestimated the fervor, the power, the results of that, and overestimated the guardrails. We thought were guardrails. Poof, dissolved like poof, wet paper. Poof. Well, let's not keep making that mistake. Let's not underestimate any longer the forces that are trying to basically blow up American democracy. And also let's not overestimate any longer the people that we thought were going to protect us. So that's the second point I want to make here. See clearly. The third one is to do what you can. That's so fundamental. Do what we can for ourselves. Nkosi Johnson, you may know that name, maybe not. He's a little boy born in South Africa, 89. He was born with HIV, acquired AIDS, died about age 12, and along that way became a national advocate for people with HIV/AIDS, particularly children. And he had a saying, which I'm going to paraphrase very slightly, but it's very close, that I've just been haunted by. It has weight. He said, do all the, including privilege, do all that you can with what you've been given in the place where you are, in the time that you have. Man, if that little kid, 11, 12, 10, when he said it, could say that and live that, I feel ashamed of doing anything less. Do what we can, all right? Doesn't mean we have to be heroic, doesn't mean we're going to save the world individually, but do all that you can with what you've been given in the place where you are, in the time that you have. The more uncertain and threatening the wider world in terms of taking action, the more important it is to batten down the hatches, If you belong to a population of people, a group of people that, are particularly vulnerable, are there things to do in your immediate circle or for yourself to strengthen ties, to look for allies, to have a plan B? What can you do? More broadly, it's probably a time to take a look at, basically we get back what we put in to eating a little more carefully. I don't know, maybe the salad bar in the student union is getting a little more activity recently, I don't know, but probably because carbs are comfort foods. The donut shop is getting a lot of activity too. But in other words, what can we do individually? Beyond that, what can we do more and more broadly? One of which is to look for community and relationships with others. I remember seeing this YouTube video of this burly ex-US Special Forces guy, bull neck, looked really intense, kind of grim, who was a survival expert, okay? Survival expert. And he was asked, okay, when things are at their worst, what's the most important thing to have? And I was waiting for the answer like crossbows, machine guns, aircraft carriers, I don't know what. He looked in the camera, he said, friends. Friends, contact. So, this is the time, I think, to reinvest in relationships, repair what can be repaired, call those people text them that we haven't connected with for a while, relatives that maybe we're a little estranged from, but we could maybe make the peace, at least agree on a few things, like our kids are lovable, or, the San Francisco 49ers are awesome, even though they're struggling. Go Rebels. Okay, I got that in. Okay, friends and so forth. That's really important. And then in the world, and here's where I want to get into some stuff that's kind of a growing edge for me. I'm sorting it out, so it may be a little rougher here. Do what we can. Sign the petitions, send a little money, vote, stand in solidarity, hold up a sign. It may not change what's happening out there, but it changes the person who does it. We feel better inside that we've done that. And in ways we don't know, we send ripples out into the world to others who are being oppressed, being mistreated, who can see, okay, at least some people are bearing witness. We're not changing it, but at least some people are bearing witness to what's happening. We certainly can do what we can. Additionally, I believe that we need to admit something. Two truths side by side. One truth. Humanity has made tremendous progress in the last 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. That's not to overlook. I'll get to the second truth in a moment. That's not to overlook what still is undone. But in terms of all kinds of things, there's been a lot of progress. Institutions that we take for granted, like a center for girls who've been trafficked, were not happening 100 years ago. Also, in bathrooms, support for therapy. I've lived through the experience in America in which there's been much more acceptance of things like coaching, therapy, mental health, recognition of addiction, recognition of trauma, been a lot of developments in those ways. Okay. And yet, wow, we need to also admit that despite these positive developments, major centers and forces of wealth and power continue in the world that are driving our planet over the cliff. With climate catastrophe, mass famines heading our way, most vulnerable people in the world, mass species extinctions already happening, rising militarization, rising authoritarianism, rising manipulation of social media, and AI is about to just take all that and drive it on steroids. It's happening. The systemic level, the structural level that continues to be manipulated by the few for their advantage at the expense of the many has not been touched by these positive developments. And I think we need to face this. And we need to beware of what swerves us away from the fact that our good efforts, our well-intended good efforts, have not gotten to the root of wealth and power at the global level. What we can do about it? So I have two suggestions that come from other people in part that I want to share with you and kind of look at together under the general heading of we do what we can. So first, let's see what is true. So I'm new to the pro-social, nonprofit, public policy world, but I've been trying to learn over the last several years. Here's what I've observed. I'm kind of like a stranger who came to town with hopefully an open mind. This is what I've seen. I've seen tremendous analyses of our problems. Great diagnosis, great description. I've seen excellent solutions. People agree. UN Sustainable Development Goals, good. Earth Charter, good. Paris Climate Accords, good. Good. I've seen also, third, fantastic, inspiring calls to action. Aspirational, wonderful. And I've seen it left at that so much of the time without moving into the action that actually changes things for real. Right? And I've seen, frankly, a lot of people just being strangely self-satisfied and self-congratulatory at their excellent analysis, their excellent prescription, and their excellent call to action, booyah, and boom, they walk away. I'm like, what? That's just not good. We've lifted individual consciousness a lot. Great. But it hasn't translated into collective action. Think about 4 levels: individual consciousness, collective consciousness, individual action, collective action. And collective action is what changes systemic and structural sources of injustice and suffering, right? So we need to translate our good efforts to get at things at a deeper level. What will actually do that? And I think 2 things are really key. The first is what's called rehumanizing. It's kind of a funny term for what the chair of our board of the Global Compassion Coalition, Mampela Rampelli, an historic figure from South Africa, married to Steve Biko, whose name you may recognize, who was murdered by the South African police while their second child was growing inside her. Wow. as she puts it, we need to become indigenous again. We need to reroot ourselves. And here's where I'd like you to indulge me while I give you a little, maybe already familiar to you, facts about anthropology. So here we go, briefly. Humans have been around for about 300,000 years. Tool manufacturing hominids showed up around 2.5 million years ago. Okay, during that long run, including up to the present, almost all the time we lived in small bands of 40 to 50 or so people that competed with other small bands, usually for scarce resources. All other primate species, and there are hundreds of primate species other than Homo sapiens, other primate species organize their social life. They're social. They live together, they eat together, they breed together, they fuss and feud together, they pick, worms off each other and eat them, protein source. They do that stuff. Their life is organized around what's called holding and controlling. Alpha dominance. Hold food, control reproduction. That's their politics. That's baboon politics. Okay? Humans, uniquely, among all the hundreds of primate species, this is a fact, evolved a different strategy. Because as the human brain got bigger, your adult brain is 4 times the size of your brain the day you were born. An adult chimpanzee's brain is twice the size it was on the day that chimp was born. So that has extended childhood, which created the need for sustained mothering of vulnerable infants, which made that mother vulnerable, which required more pair bonding, which required eventually the village it takes to raise a child. And on that long, as we evolved, we developed a different strategy for living together, for politics, which is called caring and sharing, compassion and justice, holding and controlling, wealth and power, caring and sharing, compassion and justice. That is our human legacy. We applied holding and controlling against those other tribes. As the parable tells us, there are 2 wolves in the heart, one of love and one of hate. And they co-evolved. Bands that were better at aggressing on them were more able to take care of their kids and pass on genes. Bands that were better at cooperating internally were more effective at aggressing on others. The wolf of love and wolf of hate co-evolved. It's quite poignant. But fundamentally, inside the circle of us, the wolf of love was more powerful because caring and sharing worked inside the band. Then, agriculture and animal husbandry, et cetera, came along around 10,000 years ago, spreading slowly around the world. And that enabled surpluses of food, which promoted wealth, which fostered power, and created larger and larger population groups. And if you look back at history over the last roughly 10,000 years, for most people, most of the time, it's been pretty much Game of Thrones, in which these 3 fundamental conditions that are true when you're living together with 40 or so people your whole life: common truth, common welfare, and common justice. You can't BS when you live together. You see what's really true. Yeah, you can get away with things maybe once or twice, but fairly soon you start realizing who can you count on, who's taken more than their fair share, who's, getting, stooping who. Boom, you see it. Similarly, common welfare inside a band, because your fates are bound together. And also common justice. There was no rich man's law, poor man's law inside a hunter-gatherer band. You couldn't afford it, there's some minor inequalities, typically, in a hunter-gatherer band of wealth and power, but they're very constrained by the objective conditions there. You have some kind of, chief or something or other who's a super jerk, well, people start whooping on him, or they just say, see ya, we're out of here. We're going to do our own band over here. Bye-bye, right? But when you have large populations, when you no longer have common truth because you can hide the facts, right? You no longer have common welfare because they can be starving while your kids are still well fed behind the walls of your castle. And no longer do you have common justice because rich man law, poor man's law becomes the law of the land, right? And so that's what's really happened over the last 10,000 years in a nutshell. So when we look at how do we solve this problem, it's really challenging. Because if you look at the most recent election, what most pops out is that 2/3 of the American electorate basically either liked what Donald Trump was selling or they didn't give a damn. They didn't bother to vote at all, or they were like, oh, well, and then they still voted for him anyway. That's what we have to kind of face. And I think one of the reasons for that, that's a deep problem. It's not going to be solved by some more clever ad campaign for the next, Democratic or liberal candidate, let's say, in other countries of the world. It's to face the fact that in our small bands, we could afford to be morally lazy because we didn't have to work very hard to have compassion for others. We were involved with them right there. They cared about us too, and we would reciprocate by caring about them. How do we expand the circle of us to millions of people we don't know, whose fates are not tied to ours? How do we do that? That's a really central problem. So this notion about rehumanizing is to really look for ways to help people expand that circle of us with new stories about it, drawing on people who are already good influencers, who are expanding the circle of us in ways that people can appreciate, and tapping into moral forces like organized religion or civic virtue or all kinds of other stuff that can really talk more about how our fates really are bound together. We are a large us at the scale of the whole human tribe, all 8 billion of us together. So that's rehumanizing. And then the other key piece that is really starting to stand out is that if you think about it, the lower down you get, the more local you get, the better that government is, generally. Like I live in San Rafael, and our city's awesome. They take care of stuff, You go all the way up to the federal level. Oh my God. It's a cluster, at that level. It's just crazy cakes. So more and more people are realizing, hey, there's the in-between space between government, especially larger scale government, and the individual level, where we need to claim the power we do have to come together in coalitions that accomplish real things. And related to that, I got a bee in my bonnet. I've seen basically that business people compete at the local level. Dog eat dog, local level. But man, at the political level, influencing legislation or, regulation or, who gets into office, they cooperate, like a bunch of, I don't know what, people at a party. They're all tight with each other. They pool their money. It's estimated worldwide that about $1 trillion a year are spent on bribes. In America, we had recently, like I said, Elon Musk, $132 million to influence one campaign. Over the last 15 years in America, the oil and gas industry has reported spending $2 billion to quash climate change legislation, and they've gotten what they've paid for, right? But on the other hand, this is not true in all cases, but on the other hand, what I observe is that many pro-social organizations, Buddhist organizations, therapeutic organizations, pro-social organizations, environmental organizations of many, many kinds, do the opposite. At the local level, they're really nice to each other. They're supportive, they're friendly, they're interested, they're great listeners. But at the political policy, consequential level, they almost never cooperate. They almost never cooperate, particularly in any meaningful way. Like the notion of taking, just hypothetically, let's say, 1% per year of their revenue applied to by 100 nonprofits, let's say in Las Vegas, let's say in Nevada altogether or elsewhere, and put it in a single bucket to do something. Maybe drive a social media campaign that points fingers and names names about who's benefiting from the tax code in this state, and on the other hand, how the children are suffering, for example. That would be interesting. Or to come together in various ways to encourage civic engagement, to get people, especially young people, involved. That would be interesting. Or to come together in other kinds of ways. So for me, this notion of forming coalitions that actually claim the power they do have to get something done, to me is one of the, I think, of the two things that will make the world better over the next umpteen years. So moving toward my end here, because, oh, I'm saying also the Global Compassion Coalition, that I'm part of founding, and it's now 2 years old, so it's like a toddler. It can kind of walk, but it's still pretty young. It's been supported by GARD and other really wonderful benefactors. This is what we're focused on. We're focused on what's the difference that will make a difference at the root level. Because people are taking care of individual consciousness in wonderful ways around the world. How do we translate that through the power of compassion to rehumanize and catalyze coalitions that get real things done, that reduce suffering around the world? And we invite you to help us, to join us, to do stuff with us. We're rolling. Okay, last, find peace. Again, this is what we can do individually. It helps me to find peace, to realize that as rattled as I am by elections and trends, throughout history, most people have lived under the thumb or the boot of a tyrant. Somehow they got through it. Middle Ages, currently today in many parts of the world. I'm not minimizing in any way, shape, or form what they're dealing with, but they got through somehow. My parents, my dad grew up, born in 1918 on a ranch in North Dakota in the Badlands. No running water, no electricity, no sewage systems, and grew up through the Depression and all the rest. They found a way. Okay, I find peace in that. Okay, if they did it, I can do it too. It's also helpful to realize that so much is out of our control, and I can't help it. I'm going to lay a little Dogen on you. So Dogen, great Zen master. This is something that I have been really, really hearing. I was on retreat a year ago, and I read these 2 sentences that changed my life. They were like a 2x4 across my forehead. Here are the 2 sentences, and you can see if you relate to them. So this Zen master from roughly 1200 in the Common Era in Japan, he wrote, conveying the self toward all things as practice is delusion. All things coming and carrying out practice through the self is realization. And you just kind of slow it down and absorb that. Me, I'm really good at seeing a goal, pursuing the goal, achieving the goal, looking for the next goal. Carrying the self toward those things, right? And that attitude gets rewarded, and it fosters a certain, I won't say arrogance, although maybe I should, but it fosters a kind of focus on making stuff happen. There's a place for making stuff happen, but there's a lot of wisdom in realizing, wait a minute here, we are being made by reality. We are the wave that is unique in the ocean, that is a local expression of the entire sea. That is the actual truth of things. And to realize that we have very little influence over many, many things can actually bring us to a kind of peace. Claiming the power that we do have, I'm banging on that point for sure, while realizing, whoa, so much is just out of our control. I'm staring at the spectacle in Washington in the last 72 hours, trying not to look at it too much, and I'm like, wow, okay, beyond my control. Right? What brings you personally to peace when you're rattled? Neurologically, it actually helps to raise your gaze to the horizon, because back in the Stone Age, back in Jurassic Park, even before the Stone Age, threats came from what was close to us. So when our gaze is close, like it is all the time, most of the time now, with our devices and other things, our screens, well, that fosters kind of a vulnerability to feeling threatened. On the other hand, if we look out farther, there's a shift in literally perceptual processing in the brain, and you can experiment with it, that shifts from what's called an egocentric, self-referential perspective to a allocentric, holistic perspective that's big picture, and it's less taking things personally. And if you just look out through the window or up at the sky, or just even imagine a big picture view, that is calming immediately. That brings peace, interestingly, rapidly to us. Also, taking some breaths, like I said earlier, if you're comfortable doing that, in which the exhalations are longer than the inhalations. That engages the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, which is the rest and digest branch, contrasting to the fight or flight branch. And so, if 3 breaths, in which the exhalation is roughly twice as long as the inhalation, we'll take the needle of the stressometer, the stressometer, you know, or the anxiety, the fearometer, the alarmometer, something. Anyway, from over here at an 8 or a 9, brings it down to a 6, maybe even a 4 or a 3. It's not perfect, but it's a way. There are things we can do that can bring us more into peace. Also, I so appreciate being able to look around and find things that give me comfort and inspiration and encouragement and even joy, no matter what kind of drama is going on in the Capitol. I walked into this museum. I love kids. I work a lot with kids, and I walked past these kind of art supplies, I think, roughly for little kids or something. Just made me happy to see that stuff. So what's the stuff that brings you to peace? You know, as soon as you recall it or imagine it, if I'm at the dentist's office, you know, in my mind, I'm in Tuolumne Meadows, Yosemite Park. A lot of good times there. Zzz, I'm Tuolumne Meadows, baby, Tuolumne Meadows, right? So, you know, memories, things like that, just reliable pleasures. I was talking with somebody earlier, the podcast I was on, he was saying that, you know, peanut butter and chocolate, 2 of the great combinations. I said, yeah, and for the trifecta, add a banana. He went, oh yeah, definitely. Whatever it is for you. I don't know what it is for you, you know, but for me, what gives you pleasure like that? The vastness of the night sky. Right? Perennial wisdom. People who live through horrible stuff. Gard was telling me earlier about Confucius, who was banished from his position of influence through politics, wealth and power, got him thrown out, bribed the king, essentially, and Confucius wandered, you know, but still, profound wisdom came from him. So I appreciate perennial wisdom of different kinds. Also, can you take comfort in a sense of your own innate goodness? It's weird, isn't it? Like, here I'm looking at you and you're looking at me. We walk down a street or across campus here, and if we just slow down, not to, you know, give people some kind of new age stare, you know, no, we don't do that. We just kind of slow it down and take the 3 seconds to let the person kind of land. Who are they? You know, you're not being creepy. You're just getting a sense of people, right? No big deal. Really rapidly, you can get a sense of, oh, you're a basically good person. Not perfect. Maybe you got a little this or that, you know, but basically a good person. We see that about other people. But there's a taboo about recognizing ourselves as a basically good person. Ooh, it's almost embarrassing, right? We could do a thing here, I won't, I promise you, but from my personal growth workshop background, say, well, pick a partner and look your partner in the eye and say, you are a basically good person. And then notice how it feels when they tell you that you're a basically good person. But we won't do that. We won't do that. Fear not. Okay, there's comfort in recognizing that. Good intentions, good efforts. As I think I mentioned earlier, I've been doing a lot of reckoning with my life. And for me, one thing that brought me to peace was to realize that when I look back on my life, warts and all, for me at least, and you decide for yourself, there were 3 things that were like almost standards or, yeah. One, did I bring my heart to it? You could ask yourself this question. The life you've had so far, right? This day, did you bring your heart to it? Were you open-hearted, wholehearted, courage? Were you engaged? Did you bring your heart to it? Were you sincere? Second, Did I make efforts? Not perfectly, but basically, did I try? Did I sustain effort over time? You could ask yourself that and take comfort in the yes, right? And then last, did I learn along the way? Yeah. Did you learn along the way? Did you grow a little, heal a little, awaken a little, let learning land, make repairs, learn along the way? Whatever's true about the past, right, we can take a breath and go, okay, what's going to help me rest in dignity today, right? What are those reasonable things that I would apply or I'd have as standards for others that only fair I can also have for myself? You know, we tend to set the bar fairly low for others to be a basically good person, but it's unreachably high often for ourselves. That's not right. That's not right. So there's this term in psychology called negative grandiosity, where you think you're so special that the general standards of decency and compassion that apply to everybody in the world somehow don't apply to you. Right? It's a weird kind of grandiosity. So finding and taking peace in a sense of one's own good heart, one's own fundamental goodness, innate goodness, is also a great source of peace. There's the peace in awareness. Awareness itself is never disturbed. Disturbances flow through it, like, you know, the horror show, let's say, on a TV screen, but the TV screen or the monitor, what have you, is not itself poisoned or stained by what passes through it. So being rested in awareness, more aware of awareness, more able to kind of settle into awareness itself brings us to peace. And then even deeper, interestingly, everyone can find a stillness inside themselves. We all have a sense of, okay, thoughts, feelings, sound, sights coming and going. What doesn't come or go? And very often we can really sense, particularly if we get a little quieter, maybe we're out in nature, maybe it's late at night, we're just kind of looking out, we can sense into, we can intuit what has always already been there, a stillness inside, around which things move, a stillness. And in that stillness, we can find, we really can, everyone can find this, a fundamentally benevolent quality, a loving quality, a caringness that wants to mend rather than tear apart, wants to build rather than destroy, wants to give rather than rip off, embedded in that stillness. That right there is an incredible source of inner peace. And then last, there's the peace in knowing that right now, all around the world, are countless numbers of people, millions, probably billions of people over a 24-hour cycle who are in their way, bit by bit, trying to make the world a little better in how they're raising their children, in how they're building their communities, in how they are at the local level weaving the fabric of civil society, which is the main bulwark, as scholars like Timothy Snyder point out, the main bulwark against tyranny. Local level institutions and relationships of civic society, they're doing that. And many of them and alongside them are people who are practicing, who are being a little mindful, a little compassionate, a little prayerful, a little generous. Their practice is occurring right now. We can find peace in that. And we can also recognize that our own efforts, our own practices as well, are rippling out also into the world, touching many, many lives in ways known and unknown, seen and unseen. And I personally know that your efforts and your practices help me too. I don't know exactly how that happens, but it gives me peace to know that the good heart in you that brought you here tonight, and the good intentions there, and the efforts and the practices related to that are making my own life better, and lives better for those other beings that I care about. So I want to thank you really very much for that. Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you.